Caribbean have played a significant role in the British Armed Forces, with their contributions spanning centuries and various conflicts. In the 18th century, as the British Empire expanded, many enslaved Africans were purchased for use in the military. This practice provided the British military with manpower and a further exploitation of free labour from Africans. In the 20th century, Caribbean soldiers and airmen demonstrated courage and resilience in both world wars. On arriving in Britain, some of the youth of Windrush Generation chose to enlist in the British military, continuing the tradition of service and bravery. Join us to hear the insights and reflections of some of those who enlisted.
My name is John Mortimer Walcott. I was born in Georgetown, British Guyana. I have a twin sister by the name of Joan Melvin Walcott. I came to London in 1959, the 22nd of March. I was 19 years old.
Yeah, I came to England at age 16 for the first year, so I finally joined the Royal Air Force. But I did that because I had a bit of a problem getting a job, even through the Youth Employment Bureau, which was the agency at the time. And it was suggested to me that by the folks at the Youth Employment Bureau that I should consider the military. So I went away and thought about it, and eventually I joined the Royal Air Force. I would prefer to join the Royal Air Force, not the Army, mainly because I love the uniform, and I thought it was a more elite service anyway.
Well, my name is Pamela David Clark, and it's my pleasure to tell you about my father, Sergeant Patrick Stafford David. He came to England from Dominica. That's not the Dominican Republic, it's the nature isle of Dominica. And he came in 1965 to meet his uncle, who was already here studying as a lawyer. So he came to further his education as in the mechanical field, because he'd already had a scholarship to Puerto Rico when he was younger. So he wanted to get qualifications as a mechanical engineer and an electrical engineer. So his uncle said, come to England. So he did. He came as a student.
When I arrived in London, March 1959, I went to stay with a sister of mine who was here, an older sister who was here 2 years before. She didn't have enough space for me to stay, so she took me to stay by my cousin who was here 10 years before either of us. He worked as an engineer, and he lived in Hammersmith, and he had a great big flat, so I went to stay with him. And I was there from March, April, May, June, July. August of the same year, I joined the Air Force. This is after meeting a cousin of mine who had left Guyana 2 years before, and I met him in Shepherd's Bush Market. He was walking around in his Air Force uniform. I recognized him, and he said to me, how are you, and when did you come, etc. He said, I'll tell you what, I will take you to a place where you get paid for doing nothing. I said, what do you mean? He said, the Air Force. He thought it was a free ride, but in actual fact, there's no such thing as a free ride. Wherever you go, you have to pay your dues. And I joined the Air Force. 5 years in the Royal Air Force, from August 1959 to August 1964.
In basic training, we will learn to march and salute and do the various things that airmen had to do, whilst serving. I did basic training with somewhere about 25 people, and there were about 5 blacks among them, black folks. I found it easy. Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was fun to me. There's a lot of things we did which I used to do as a child in Jamaica. Playing games, running around, that sort of thing, sports, and so on.
Out of a squadron of 80, we had 2 blacks, myself and a guy from Dominica. I didn't find it difficult to fit in. The reason being, I come from a large family, 8 brothers, 6 sisters. It was just a big family. The only thing, they were white. The only other black person like myself was a guy from the Dominica.
Dad joined the army, but he joined the territorial army because he was working and studying, but he just loved service. He just loved the idea of being in the army. He was in the Boy Scouts as a child, and we called him the Eternal Boy Scout. That was the name that I called him anyway, an Eternal Boy Scout. He worked with Whitehall with the Ministry of the Environment. He serviced their equipment, air conditioning, because that was his skill. You know, refrigeration, all things mechanical and electrical.
Yeah, after basic training, I chose telecommunication, and I was sent off to radio school. At the time, it was in Compton Bassett in Wiltshire. And telecommunication was, at that time, telephone, telex, and teleprinting. So we used to send messages via those means, telephone and telex and teleprinting, using the Murray code and the ticker tape, tick, 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 tick. It took me 6 months for the full training as a trade person. I went to a couple of stations in the United Kingdom and was eventually sent on a posting to Cyprus.
Oh, I became a steward, which is a branch of the catering section. I was persuaded to, I didn't particularly want to be a steward, but I was persuaded to, this would be something that would be worthwhile. And to be quite honest, all I wanted to do when I came is to do something. Because the first job I did when I came was I was a cabinet maker. My father was a cabinet maker. And I got a job with a firm doing cabinet making. But I didn't particularly want to stay in England. I came in March. And as it got warm, it was okay. But when it started getting cold, I wanted to get out of England. So I joined the Air Force with the hope of going out into the Middle East or the Far East, which I got an opportunity, and I went out to Cyprus. Cyprus was still a British colony. I was stationed out in Cyprus in 1959, December.
I was stationed first at Bridge North, which is where we did the basic training. Then went to Compton Bassett. So this is where I did the trade training. And then I went to Royal Air Force Abingdon, where we worked in the telecommunications center there. From Abingdon, I went to Communications Central in Cyprus. I learned to speak a little Greek while in Cyprus. So I say, Kalimera, kumbare. That means good morning, friend. Yeah. Things like if I say Kalinikta, that means good night. Kalispera is good afternoon, sort of thing. And if I say Enachai Paragelo, I'm asking you for a cup of tea. Things like that, yeah.
Yes, I picked up some Greek from the local population, like good morning, Galimera, good day, Galinikta, good night, how are you, Wasilene? Oh yes, I picked up a lot of it because this is 30 odd years ago. I can't remember a lot of it now.
My dad went to camp in Gibraltar. He went to Cyprus, various camps. You know, he'd go on annual camp. Now, as children, we looked forward to his return because he would bring hardtack. He would bring his rations back. I mean, it's not that we needed his rations, but it was just such an unusual assortment of foods. There was something called hardtack. That was a biscuit similar to doggy biscuits. They were so hard square biscuits. They would survive years, I think, wrapped up. So he would have that and little containers of jam. Yeah. So as children, we just looked forward to Daddy's home, Daddy's coming back, and we would eat this hardtack. Yes, just before he left, he would have all his kit in the front room. It's amazing how much kit a soldier has to carry. There would be bags, sleeping bags, his little pots and so on to cook with, boots all shined up. Half the room was full of this kit. Dad served as an armorer, but before we get to this stage, he had to train over several years. So every time he trained in Gibraltar, so every time they went to Gibraltar, he took a different grade and passed it. So he did his grade 3, another time he passed his grade 2, and eventually he passed his grade 1, which is the highest distinction as an armorer. So he had the top qualification as an armorer. An armorer is responsible for the safe maintenance of the equipment. So whether it's guns, vehicles, machinery, he has to make sure that soldiers are safe operating the machinery. Some of the armorers were in battle. They were, and others stayed at base. So an armorer has to be able to retrieve a broken piece of equipment and mend it safely. They have to make sure that a gun is safe and that every soldier's gun is safe to be fired. So an armorer is quite an important person and a trusted person in a soldier's life. It could mean the difference between life and death for a soldier, whether the armorer is, good or not. My dad never went to Northern Ireland. I mean, he served during the time of conflict, but he was never posted in Northern Ireland. When I asked him why, he said, they said that I would stand out too much. And they said it as a joke, that I would stand out too much, which was probably true. It was said as a offhand joke, but it was probably true. But I was later told by a member of the British Legion that no, they wouldn't send an armourer into Northern Ireland. That was far too valuable a post because a lot of investment had gone into his training, so they wouldn't have put him in that position.
I was in Cyprus for about 6 months, formed different friendships with different guys from different squadrons and different countries. And there was a guy from Jamaica called Kennedy, who was in the same boxing team as myself. He had a birthday party and invited me, among other servicemen, to come to the party. We got there, it was an evening party. We got there, it was 6, 7 o'clock. And I remember sitting on the balcony, practicing my Greek with his Greek neighbors, because the house he was living in was off the base, and it was rented by the military, and they put military personnel to live in them. And the owner of the house, who owned the property, was a Greek, a local Greek family. So I sat on the balcony chatting with them, practicing my Greek. And for some unknown reason, I think he was a Scotsman, a serviceman, had some altercation in the house with someone else, another black guy. I don't know what it was about. But he came outside and held on to me and said, I want to talk to you. You're another one I want to talk to. So what's this all about? I'm sitting out here for the last half an hour. So he was physically bigger than me, he was a Scotsman. And he pulled me off the balcony, by my hand, and took me outside. He wanted to take me out in the open field to give me a good hiding. But he got a surprise because he knew nothing about me. But I was physically smaller than he. I'm only 5'4", and he was about nearly 5'9". And I remember him holding on one hand, tugging me towards this open pasture, but he had to get through a gate. And as soon as to get the latch off, he slackened his grip. And as soon as I felt his grip slacken, I took my hand away, and he came towards me to regain the grip. And as a result, he exposed his whole face, and I hit him a left and a right, and he was on the ground. And I jumped up in the air and came down and I cracked the 3 ribs for him. See, now, I wasn't elated over that. He was a serviceman like myself, but he was from a different squadron. It was just sad that 2 British servicemen had to end up in this kind of situation. But I know what prompted him was nothing but racism. Yeah, and I already had my experience with the kind of racist behavior, not only in the military, but before I joined the military, I experienced it. So I was able to, I had no apologies for my behavior. And I felt all I did was defended myself and my integrity.
Okay, I was really happy to find this picture in my mum's album. It's my dad, probably he was about 10 years old, and he is at a Boy Scouts Jamboree camp. And sitting next to him is the first Prime Minister of Dominica, Patrick John. And they are doing a first aid course by the looks of things. So one of them's got their arms in bandage and the other one's got his legs strapped up. My dad enjoyed that sort of thing. Yeah. My dad and Patrick John were friends, and they did remain friends after my dad left Dominica. While still in Dominica, he enlisted as a volunteer fireman, and he and his friends were all members of the Dominica Volunteer Fire Brigade. My dad was quite an active type of person. During my childhood, I remembered many of his hobbies. Photography was one of his hobbies, and whatever hobby he had, he'd go into it full time. He'd have all the kit, all the equipment. He did winemaking. So again, we had all the equipment. Judo and karate, the martial arts, so he had all the kits. I remember one day when he came into the living room, my mum had friends round, and he came fully dressed in his judo kit with one of those things that you swing around, like it's like two batons joined by a piece of chain. Much to the discontent, much to the horror, I think, of my mum's friends who were sitting there wondering whether he was going to swing this thing around their heads. But that was my dad. He was funny and, yeah, full of character.
Moving around in the Royal Air Force and postings, as they call it, for stations, different stations, offered great changes to places and so on. We learned to meet different people, know different places, and so on. So I enjoyed all that. The RAF was a very interesting place. I learned a lot of things there, and I enjoyed sports. It was good for people doing sports. I did track and field. I did high jump, pole vaulting, boxing, water polo, things like that I did. I enjoyed most doing sprinting and high jump. I won medals for high jump, 100 meters, pole vaulting. Oh yes, I did boxing and at welterweight level, but I got brutalized by a mismatch. So the young man, they put, we didn't have I didn't get the training I should have had in terms of preparation for the match. And the person they put me against, matched me up with, was much more experienced, much bigger. So it was almost, it was what it says, a mixed match. Yeah. A big Scotsman with shoulders about a yard wide, massive guy. Yes. And his experience was much more than mine. The spectators enjoyed the match, yes, but I didn't because I got brutalized. Well, yes, I think they were just there for the fun. They weren't feeling what I was feeling.
Okay, so my dad's formal training began at Borden, and Borden is a long-standing training centre for army personnel. And after that, he progressed to Chatham, and that's at the Royal School of Military Engineering in Chatham. And then he trained in Gibraltar to be an armourer. So he did his grade 3, then grade 2, and eventually grade 1, reaching the highest levels. My dad rose through the ranks to become a corporal, then a provisional sergeant, and then a full sergeant. And he was an ambitious person, so he wanted to become a staff sergeant. But he was told that the corps was too small to support a staff sergeant. So that's his unit was too small to support a staff sergeant. So he asked to be transferred, and they said no, that they couldn't justify transferring him because it was just too small a unit. But the real reason, he wanted to go to a bigger unit. But I think he felt the real reason was they felt he'd risen high enough. What was all that ambition about. And plus, they probably wanted to keep him there to tell the truth, because he was a very valuable member of that unit. So he was blocked, but he took it cheerfully. You know, my dad wasn't going to make a big fuss about that. He might have been disappointed, but he just got on with it.
The most difficult part of military life was officers said to us, orders, right? Orders are for the guidance of wise men and the obedience of fools. So truly, orders were hard to deal with, especially when it comes from people who have other motives.
My dad's skills in the military became very useful in civilian life, because in 1983 he went to Saudi Arabia to work with a company as an engineer. And one of the first things he found when he got there was a huge, expensive piece of machinery that had just been sitting there for about 5 years, and they'd not been able to use it. And my dad said, "Let me have a look at that." And they said, "Oh, we can't fix it. There's a part missing." Now, my dad's training had equipped him to fix anything electrical and mechanical. So he was able to make the part that was missing and put it into this piece of equipment and got it working. And they were so pleased with him. His contract was renewed year after year until he retired. Whereas other British people, they had to really sort of fight for their contract to see if it was going to be removed. And there was quite a bit of jealousy from some of the expats whose contracts were not renewed. But one thing I remember about my dad is that he was a confident person, and that confidence lay on the skills that he had. He knew that he was the best at what he did, and whatever racism that might have existed, he floated above it.
The Royal Air Force did a jolly good job on me. It gave me a trade, which helped me when I came in Civil Street, getting many jobs, different jobs from it. And I also found that it helped me even beyond myself. My son got a job for 18 months contract at the Buckingham Palace. And they checked my Royal Air Force record for recommendations and so on. It helped a great deal. Yeah, my son, Tyrone, was an accountant in the King's office at Buckingham Palace. Whilst working at Buckingham Palace, the King Charles III offered 6 people in the office medals and first day covers and a letter.
I always remember my dad as a great storyteller. One of the things I regret is that I didn't film him, because he was such an animated storyteller, and he told stories in such a way that even if I recalled them, I wouldn't be able to tell them in the same way. One of his favorite phrases was, "Unbeknownst to me." And there would be some drama waiting to happen. There was usually a fight in the story, and he would stand up and demonstrate how it went, because I think as a boy he grew up on the cowboy and Indian movies, and they were always full of action and fight. So he grew up on that diet of cinema. So his storytelling involved all that animation.
Going back home or in the community or even out and about in the uniform, it seems as people were fascinated by it, and they showed warmth towards me. At home, it was like to see me like that. My mother and sister and stepfather really respected me in that way. My mother was a nurse in England. She came to England to study nurse, and she became a SRN. And she worked in Wolverhampton and Dudley in the hospital, Burton Road Hospital in Dudley, and so on, and New Cross Hospital. She had many friends as nursing, friends together. And they were quite fascinated with me, Mrs. Lewis's son, in my uniform. They quite liked me wearing the uniform. They found it interesting, and yeah, it led me to dating a few of them. Yes, and a few.
In my dad's storytelling, he was always the hero. He always ended up the winner on top. So whatever trap anybody tried to set for him, he always came out on top. So, and I think I can link that to the days where he would come home and relate something, some racist incident. But he always came out on top because they couldn't beat him for his skills, you know? He always came out on top. So he was very resilient.
Yes, I enjoyed moving around from place to place. The first place I visited after leaving England was I went out to Cyprus. From Cyprus, I went out to places like with the Air Force. I went to the Lebanon, yes. And this was all on, not to do with the Air Force. I went there as a civilian. You were given leave and you could travel around the Middle East. So I enjoyed that, the life I lived in the RAF, in the military. I was from a large family, 8 brothers, 6 sisters. So joining the military, having all these people around you, it didn't throw me in any way. And my mother was a very disciplined, I would say God-fearing. She was not a religious fanatic, but she believed in right and wrong. Yeah. And my father also was a disciplinarian. So when I came to England and got to the military, the kind of discipline which the military required, I already had that kind of training. So I didn't find it very difficult to fit in.
One of the most important thing I enjoyed about military life was the camaraderie. You know, everybody were friends. We got on well. We got dances, we got sports together, drink together. You know, we made friendship right round. It was quite something. I enjoyed it very much. I think the RAF in particular, in my case, but military life in general, I think would offer the present day youth a lot of discipline. It will help them to behave differently and perhaps cut down on crime even. But I think military life brings about a certain discipline to people and to young men especially, young people especially, would be given the type of discipline needed in society to keep away from crime and so on. So I think it helped me, and I think it will help many others.
In 2012, 2013, my dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And I said, well, you're coming to live with me, you know. And he agreed straight away. He'd resisted years before, but he agreed straight away. Yes, he would come. Um, but the fighter that he was, even though they said they weren't going to treat him, he decided, well, I'm going to treat myself. So he investigated natural medicines, and I found myself making juices out of vegetables and putting him on the fast that he wanted to go on and so on. He just took control of things because he wasn't going to be a victim. He was going to fight this. So it was really a fight against cancer. Anyway, it was palliative care. I knew this, even if he didn't accept it for most of the time. And one day I took a walk in my neighborhood and I came across a pub that was being refurbished, and it was called the Warrant Officer. And I was quite intrigued by the name because I knew it was a military name, but I didn't even know what a warrant officer was. So I walked inside to find out who owned it because they were advertising poetry readings and Women's Institute, and the British Legion could meet there. So all this is quite new for my neighborhood, which seemed to be on the up. So I walked in to find out more about what would be happening there. And I met a man called Rob, who was what they'd call a vet, an ex-military man. He'd used his pension to buy this pub. And he had ambitions for what he was going to do and the sort of things he was going to have, Sunday lunch and events and so on. So I was quite interested. And I asked him about the name of the pub, and he said, well, that was my rank in the military. So I got interested and told him about my dad had also been, you know, a soldier. Um, So we talked about that for a while, and I eventually told him, well, actually, my dad's, not very well, and he's not expected to last very long. And then he said, well, if your dad was a soldier, he can have a military funeral. So I asked him more about that, and he said, yes, the British Legion will come and we will perform the last post at your dad's funeral. So I was amazed because I didn't know anything about that. So I went home and told my dad, and he was so pleased. He was so happy. His eyes lit up. Bless him. He was so frail at the time. And he said, oh, well, in that case, you've got to have my military history. And I grabbed a pen and grabbed a bunch of post-its, and I was quickly writing down all the information he was telling me. And he said, read that back to me. His memory was amazing. I would read it back. He said, no, you've got that wrong. It's this. And I wrote it all down. And that's how I got his military history, because as a child, I wasn't really into that, as a young person. So my dad was able to give me his military history. He was able to have the funeral that the British Legion provided. They played the last post. They arrived. I did the eulogy, and the sound of that bugle, I remember that. I tear up to this day if I hear the last post. I remember the funeral. I remember my dad being so happy that he was going to have that honor. And that makes me very pleased because he was a man of service, a man of duty, and he deserved that. And I feel glad that he had that funeral.
The most enjoyable thing about my life is the camaraderie, to travel, meet people from different. As a matter of fact, I was only 19 years old, and I met a lot of 19 years old from England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, Australia, from the British Commonwealth. And it was all quite interesting. Yeah. See, and a lot of them were my contemporaries, 19, 20, 21, and that way I was able to interact with them in a very positive way.
Sergeant Patrick Stafford David, we salute you.
My title in the Royal Air Force was Senior Aircraftman Justin Lewis. My Royal Air Force number was 427-1817 SAC, Justin Lewis. Sir.
425-3291, Senior Craftsman Walcott.